So let me start off by introducing Richard Devon. Richard is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of MES. He's an experienced senior executive who has served as a key team leader responsible for global manufacturing, technology operations, research and development, strategic planning and product development in consumer, industrial, and commercial product sectors at Ingersoll Rand, Stanley Black & Decker, Textron, and Ford Motor Company. Richard is a seasoned private equity and angel fund investor with private company board of director experience. Richard is a mechanical engineering graduate of Kettering University and attended MIT as a Sloan Fellow, where he earned an MBA degree. And as I mentioned, for those who were on the phone, he currently resides in Charlotte and Weddington, actually. Next, Ajay Garg is a CEO and co-founder of MES. He's held regional and global leadership positions at industrials and fintech OEMs like Ingersoll Rand, Stanley Black & Decker, Colfax, Diebold, and Dresser Rand. Ajay has a diversified experience of leading engineering, product management, quality, and services teams. He gained 7 years of expat business experience in Asia Pacific with an assignment in Shanghai, China. Ajay is accomplished at innovation, new product development, COGS reduction, supply chain development, offshoring and onshoring. He's a mechanical engineering graduate from Rochester Institute of Technology and earned his executive MBA from Alfred University in New York. As a consultant, Ajay continues to follow his passion to guide businesses uplift their EBITDA. Ajay is an active LinkedIn contributor and an invited speaker on the topic of margin expansion. And Ajay just moved to Austin, Texas with his family from Charlotte. Sanjay Kumar. Sanjay is CTO and co-founder of Margin Expansion Solutions. Sanjay has over 30 years of experience in the IT and telecommunications arenas in the US. He served in several key technical and management positions, provided advisory and consulting services to several major corporations. In his current capacity, he focuses on operations, technology development, and the execution of strategically diversified solutions, focusing on information technology, best practices, and innovation. He has a master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of Illinois in Chicago. He is an innovator at heart and holds a patent with USPTO, as well as several patents pending in wireless and electronic database management. So that's our roundtable. And let me just kick this off by saying, as we know and we see every day, inflation is going crazy. Supply chain disruptions are continuing to disrupt businesses, consumers. You have it. And the other, I think major issue with businesses is their, being able to get the right workforce and enough workforce. So those are just three of many reasons why, margins in businesses are being pressured and under a lot of, I think, negative elements. So these guys have solutions to that. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Richard. I think are you going to start off?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll turn the microphone off to Richard, and I'm going to shut up.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. And you didn't need to shut up, but we really appreciate the kind introductions and giving us all the, sharing our background with this very impressive team of CFOs. I hope you don't mind that the meeting is being recorded. Obviously, it's for your organization, for quality purposes, and also to share in the future. And we're very happy to engage with you. Joining me on the call, as Tom mentioned, is Ajay Garg, our CFO, and Sanjay Kumar, our CTO. Right. And based on our collective experiences with successful execution of productivity, innovation, and strategic initiatives, we determined that there is indeed an unmet need to address margin expansion programs execution. We've developed a proprietary margin expansion platform that empowers work and leadership teams with the types of tools needed to implement profit improvement programs and initiatives with predictable outcomes. So I'll start with that. But one thing I like to, I'm not here basically to pitch our business per se, but we are, more or less sharing our expertise. And in this roundtable discussion, if you do have any questions, we would appreciate if you would put them in the chat box, and we will try to address them as they come up. And also, if you really want to engage or ask a question right away, just kind of raise your hand, and again, through the chat box, and we'll also maybe address it at that point in time.
I'll try to help you monitor that, Richard.
Okay, yeah, if you help me monitor, that would be perfect. As Tom was saying, the whole landscape around what we call margin expansion, and we use the term margin expansion because we think about cost and growth and strategic initiatives more strategically than just productivity, even though productivity is important. In addition to that, we also we think about margin, from a strategic standpoint, because most businesses, depending on the type of business that they are, have different priorities, right? And there's different drivers. But right now, as Tom talked about their current landscape, is really, around commodities inflation. You have competitive pricing pressures. You have rising operations costs, foreign exchange volatility. There's a need to fund cybersecurity and other strategic initiatives within the company for security purposes and other growth initiatives. And then obviously you got this overall macroeconomic and political environment that we are currently in. Ultimately, it's not if we're going to have a downturn, it's when we're going to have a downturn, and are we prepared, right? So that's the first question. I think the other piece, when we get into, there are several what I'll call systemic issues or gaps associated with achieving a margin improvement, right? And I'll start by just kind of defining some of the current issues, based on studies from Deloitte and others, consulting agencies, is that the fact that, there's 90% of companies have margin improvement programs. And when I say margin improvement programs, I'm talking cost growth and strategic type programs that impact their margin. However, 75% of those companies do not achieve margin improvement targets. I think that's not a surprise. And then above and beyond that, you got to say, well, and 44% miss their targets by more than 50%, even if they got active programs in place. And you got to ask yourself, why, right? But back to this whole area of coping with the current economic environment and the pending economic downturn. When we think about P&L leaders, well, P&L leaders, they need to be more agile in this changing environment, and they need to take risks now to get ahead of the curve. Okay, so kind of what is it that they need to do, right? Well, given the fact that, for example, for CFOs in particular, what do you need to deal with in this pending environment, right? You've got back office systems that you need to understand. There's the opportunity to understand and automate data. It's this whole area of workforce productivity. Just to give you an example, I'm also on the board of the National Association of Corporate Directors for the Carolinas. And this is one of the most prominent issues, is really dealing with the changing workforce post-pandemic and what to do going forward. Not only the availability of skilled labor, but the productivity of that labor, given, whether it's the cost, whether it's the output, how to manage the expectations of the young people, and how all of that and how the cultures are clashing between the existing management team and the upcoming youthful gen question markers, right? I had a matter of fact, I had a conversation a couple of days ago with one of my friends who's a CTO at a major company. And he was telling me that he's having some huge frustrations because his Gen Xers are coming into the office saying that they're ready for roles that he doesn't frankly believe they're ready for, right? And so that's a major, major driver of concern for him. And I've heard that over and over and over again. And as a result, you have people that are leaving. So this person obviously was given the opportunity to interview for the position, but didn't get it. And guess what happened? The following week, the person quit. And he said that happened 2 or 3 times within his organization. And I found so that impacts your overall productivity and your ability to move forward. So there's a lot of issues around that. And, so you can get into, well, why did that happen, et cetera. But, it could be, some, the structural issues need to change within your organization. But that also relates to your ability to achieve a path to margin expansion. So we've identified, based on our experience, that there's a solution path that it's about 6 steps. And I think the first step I think we laid out was, you need to create a credible margin improvement portfolio, right? And where my experience, our experience, particularly Ajay and I, we worked together at Ingersoll Rand. We had a situation where the president of the business unit that we were in came in and says, look, commodity prices are out of control. We weren't expecting copper prices to go up this much. It's going to have a $30 million hit on our bottom line unless we do something. And we don't really have enough time or to price our way out of this, right? And I think we can relate to that even now in this environment. Pricing strategy is not sustainable. There's some deals we made. So we had to come up with productivity offsets to do this. And so we put in place a systematic approach to do this, right? And the first thing you do is that kind of like organizationally create a sense of urgency that something needs to be done. Hey, we got this problem, we're in trouble, it's going to impact our bottom line and shareholder returns. So what do we do? So the first thing that you do is to create a credible improvement portfolio, a margin improvement portfolio, or whichever. If it's, again, it can be growth, it can be productivity, it can be strategic. It could be M&A situations, and depends on where the company is and what the timing is. But in our current environment, right, this inflationary environment, do you have a credible portfolio of programs and projects that will address the issues at hand, right? And do they align with the strategic priorities of the business? So if anyone has a question, they certainly can pop it up. Secondly, as you start moving through this portfolio, you need to really understand who owns these programs and projects and where the execution requirements reside. That sounds like an obvious step, but in complex businesses, it may not be. Your accounting systems might not be the same. You have ownership issues. You have political issues, right? So where are the accountabilities? So you as a leader, you need to understand where these things reside. And the third thing about this, next piece about this is you need to have some sort of processes, right? And tools that allow you to drive results, effectively, right? And your goal obviously would be to have a sustainable approach to doing this, right? Whatever you do, you want to make certain that it's sustainable. Okay. Sorry about that.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir. Who's speaking?
It's Tom Moppet.
Tom, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you see that given the landscape that we're in now, public companies especially having to be able to give peeks under their kimono about how they're going to maintain their margins? obviously stock prices are pretty big priorities for the, leadership team of a public company.
What I'm saying, the answer to your question is not yet, effectively. I think a lot of companies are passing off cost, with the inflation, because you can see it's driving inflation and they're passing off costs, but that's not sustainable, right? But they're worried about it, right? And I think that the biggest, where I see the biggest problem is around, at least the discussions around supply chain viability, right? The robustness of the supply chain, right? And their ability to react to, the availability of parts and components and labor, So they're seeing all of that increase all at one time. So that's what I think they're just trying to figure out what to do. Right now, they're kind of passing the cost off, but it's going to catch up with a lot of these companies, right? Particularly if things slow down. And that's kind of where, where we, kind of emphasize our efforts, right? What happens is that companies basically have, our business leaders, they have access to massive amounts of data, business critical information, right? But they really don't know necessarily what to do with it. And they got to get through it very quickly, et cetera, but it's difficult to do, right? And so when these companies actually work to say raise kimono and identify, well, there's a little bit of reluctance to say that we're in trouble, but certainly the trend is there. The trend is there, and they're going to have to do something about it, right? Did that kind of capture and answer what?
Yeah, that did, but you did hit on a little bit on the workforce dynamics that are going on that, I think maybe companies are going to have to really, really look at automating some of their processes.
Oh, no doubt about
it. To create scale and, not have to hire people to do those things.
Yeah, and that's true. You need to make the information that's out there as automated and visible to the right people or the right pieces of the organization at the right time, so you get the right kind of not only execution but the right kind of accountabilities, driving the kind of behaviors necessary to get the results, right? And if I'm a CFO, of course, I'm going to be searching for certain types of information that is really focused on return on assets, right? And obviously cash, for business viability. And so if we're going to be making investments and growing, I want to make certain we do that profitably. But at the same time, I need to have visibility to the impact of these external factors, right? And so you need to know there needs to be alignment with all of that, for sure,
Yeah. So Richard, to Tom's point, I think definitely there is an opportunity for the businesses to make go up and make an assessment on the current workforce, on what they are doing. If what they are doing can be automated, then they need to look at that opportunity and reallocate those resources to something which cannot be automated, or make them more productive. So that's a key piece, is businesses are not on top of what's out there technology wise, which can help them to automate. There is a lot of talk, and business leaders are busy, so sometimes they don't even get to the point of understanding what's relevant in their business. There's a lot of discussions, a lot of experts writing white papers or on the TV, but for the business leaders, they need to get to the level of it's relevant to their business. And there are a lot of these advances which can help them with automation, but somebody needs to get to their to the ears, basically, with all the daily chores or daily fires they're fighting. They don't have the time, or nobody's got to that level of their interest. So that's an opportunity where automation can help.
Okay.
And basically remove some of those current heartburns from the labor force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, that's really a big deal. Like, you start thinking about, you got to ask the question. If I'm in it, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of systems in place for us to pull information around how well our business is doing or could be doing, what kind of programs and projects are in place, depending on the type of business you have. And the question you got to ask yourself is, what do I do with all this data, right? So, and the role of senior leadership, particularly, CFOs in particular, they need to include the ability to look at data from a scientific standpoint, and also from a management standpoint, data science and data management, right? So how do we facilitate, or how is that facilitated within organizations, right? And like Ajay's saying, you've got a lot of programs and projects that are being deployed, but how efficiently are they being deployed? And if they're, if you don't have the workforce to implement some of these things, well, how do you automate the information in a way that you can prioritize what's most important, right? And get the best return for the resources that you have, and also what resources you need to build up in order to achieve more, right? So our next step is to unify the data systems, create a single source of truth, so you can get a holistic view of the financial performance drivers, right? Performance and the drivers of performance. Companies have typically have, the larger the company, more complex the company, companies that drive their strategies really based on acquisitions or divestitures and a lot of changes. They do have a tendency to have a lot of different systems, a lot of sources of data, and inconsistent operating systems, business operating systems. So a key step is to really create a source of data that allows the right kinds of information to be pulled out that drive performance, and make that visible to the right stakeholders in the organization. Any questions about that? Because there are a lot of tools out there that allow you to capture data and consolidate data, what they call the Power BI and others. But what they don't necessarily tell you is what to do with that data, right? And
we have a small enough group that if anybody wants to go off of mute to ask a question, please do so.
Yeah, good. How many people do we have? 6, 8, it doesn't matter. But yeah, if anybody wants to come off, that absolutely ask a question.
We've got 11.
Oh, okay, this is good. Okay. So if anyone have any questions, or I guess I can throw out an open-ended, an open-ended question that would be, what's your experience with the quality of information that you have to help you make decisions around financial performance? Is there anyone who that wants to open to address that?
It really depends. I'm working with a company now that has been around for 13 years. They're working across several platforms, and feels like they have a lot of data. They have not sufficient information. First of all, because you have this spread over several platforms. Power BI is one of them, and by the way, it's one of the most confusing things I've ever seen and ever worked with.
Yes.
And they have some third-party automatic systems feeding into Power BI, also into their financial systems, and there are various discrepancies which are not huge, but which I've been trying to track down and explain for myself at least. And despite the fact that people have been on this for years, they're still unexplained. So sometimes too much data is bad, especially if you don't have an organization big enough or capable enough to transform it all into useful information.
No, you're right. You're right. Too much data is overwhelming, right? And the question is, well, what do I do with this data, right? The first thing you do is you first of all identify what is it that what does success look like, and how do you measure the path to get there, regardless, and that's typically in the form of programs and projects and their impact on the financials, right? So if you break it down that way, well, then what data do I need? Well, you obviously need to know what projects and programs you have. Yeah, you need to know what the status of those things are. When did they start? Are they allegedly ending? And oh, by the way, where's their performance en route to the end, right? And the third thing that you need to have about that is you need to be able to glean the information based on what's important, key to performance drivers, performance and financial drivers. Those have to be made visible, and you have to glean from that data how effective you are on a program by program basis, or by a business unit by business unit basis, or plant by plant basis, right? Or the overall enterprise basis, right? And who needs to know that information, right? So again, if you unify the data in a way that's agnostic to where it comes from, that's the key. And then have that output configured in a way that's meaningful. That's where you can make the most progress around data. And you take a lot of the data, what I'll call data noise, out of it. It's just unfortunate that a lot of companies, like say Power BI and others, I'm not knocking them because they do a good service, but they allow you to get more data. You might be able to configure it in a way that, it's just a lot of information, a lot of data, but it doesn't inform you what to do. And that's a whole different skill set. And so that needs to be developed. Okay, any questions about that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. No.
So, sorry, Tom. I was just going to also agree with the comment that data without insights is of no value. So the quantity of data is not an issue, or collecting the data is not an issue today. Data is being, a data lake and data consolidation is happening all the time and very cheaply. How do you interpret what is the story the data is telling? That's where you need the experts. That's where you need the insight, knowledge, or what are the metrics, or what are the risks, or what are the actionable insights. That has to come out from the data to actually be meaningful. That's what is really missing.
My question is, based on MES's experience, what is your typical methodology going into a client?
You want to answer that out, Jay?
Yeah. So, Tom, typically our approach is basically we want to sit with each business and understand where they are, so that we can understand their current state, and then where do they want to be. Now, in typical situations, what we have found is fragmented information or fragmented data. So they are having difficulty and are doing a lot of data entry manually. That's a recipe for error and recipe for mistakes. If you have manual data entry going on, first off, it's error prone. Secondly, it takes too much time. That's why automation, we've been championing automation, because what is on the system doesn't need to be pulled manually and entered again manually to basically consolidate it. So that's where we start with most of the businesses. That's what we have started with, that they don't have a unified source. It's very simple to do in today's technology, but it has to be done. The system has to be there in place, and then start to look at what are their goals and what are their programs, and start to run the stakeholder dashboards or stakeholder analytics. So again, a CFO wants a different set of information coming from the same data set versus a CEO versus a CTO. So it's the leadership level information which helps those leaders to be on top of the status as well as to make good decisions. But they cannot, it's not one size fits all type of information which works. They all need to be looking at the financials or the key metrics at the same time, but the actionable insights may be different for each of the functional leaders. And that's where we sit down and talk through what is relevant and meaningful, so they can then become more productive and engaged in their overall decision making, as well as giving directions and guidance to their teams. So they're not really just sitting there and either getting a lot of data but don't know how to help, or it's just noise and they are just coming back after weeks and weeks and seeing no change of status. So that's our typical approach. We want the businesses to understand where the normal gaps are. We work with them. We look at their systems, understand how to pull them together in for the analytics, and then give them this real time. So that's another piece of automation, is now you have removed the manual labor portion plus added the speed of information. So you provide the information almost real time. We suggest every day, instead of making it an IoT type of a situation where it's changing all the time, right? That's not needed. So we every day versus every month is a big delta. You give them current information without any buddy going into the systems or manually entering, just impractical. And then most of them then start to have the information and really are asking the right questions and giving the right directions. And that's what we have seen has made a major leap in their productivity and major difference in what they were doing in the past versus what they start to see as they go forward with this system.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So thanks, thanks, Ajay. And I'll kind of add to that. When you talk to a potential, what we'll call a client, but when you're looking at a business needs, first of all, do you really know the outcome that you're seeking, right? And what are you trying to improve in this case, right? We're obviously trying to grow margin through productivity, growth, or other strategic initiatives, right? And then you have to, for us, when we go in, you really need to understand, when we talk about data, really understanding how the data influences your objectives, right? What data is important? What's the workflow of the data? What's the objectives of the data? How are decisions made around the data? You know, those kinds of things. And then how do we translate that into stories, right? Or information, as we call it, right? And so if there's sufficient information, then you can drive behavior, right, around performance. So that's kind of, you know, it's kind of like this general statement. It's like the CFOs must be able to look at financial data and find strategic trends and glean actionable insights, as Ajay said, that will impact their performance. So that's really the ultimate goal here. So that's what we want to do. And obviously forecast integrity is very important, you know, because if you've got good information and you've got good processes, then your integrity of your forecasting is very important to drive in your performance, right? And the other thing is it also allows you to, you know, get to this whole topic of what do we do in this inflationary environment? Again, not if the downturn is coming, when the downturn is coming. We obviously don't know, but not 100%, but we know it's coming. So, but at the end of the day, you know, what are the risks associated that's associated with our portfolio of activities? So having a good source, you know, consistent source of information that's made visible to the right stakeholders and drive the behavior of the organization is very critical in terms of risk management, you know, because you got some predictability associated with that. Okay, anyone have any questions on any of that? Comments? Okay, so if we think about, like, again, you know, as we start moving forward, we're saying, okay, well, we want to be able to forecast the performance. We want to know what the implications of risk are, et cetera. We talked about that.
Richard,
you know,
we do have a question.
Oh, yes. Who is that?
Robert says, is there a replacement for activity-based cost?
Replacement for activity-based.
Hey, Richard, this is Bob.
Are you, this a replacement? Go ahead.
Activity-based cost was back in the 90s. I worked for PerkinElmer when Space and Optical Technology, and we had specific projects, and we actually were able to measure the milestones on these projects because they had similar characteristics in every of these projects. But that was activity-based cost, and looks like, or if I understand this, you are basically designing a process for clients that are in a crisis, which a lot of them, all these companies are in some type of crisis based on inflation. Do you customize these, or do you use a activity-based cost is basically measuring the performance of something from the past and what improvements they can make, but at the same time they have to adjust the costs on it so they know what their bottom line is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get it now. Yeah. Yeah. I was thrown off a little bit, but yeah, I'm going back also to activity-based cost. I do remember that.
ABC.
ABC. That's exactly right. The way I've always thought about that is from a running technology organizations, was really about creating a pipeline of program activity, and then being able to manage that pipeline with key performance indicators of whether or not you can go from one step to the next step as required. For example, from the ideation step to the execution step, there's typically 4 or 5 steps in between, right? And are you still on track to that? And of course, what's really critical for you to execute those programs? And in current times, as you generate more data around the success or failures of programs, well, that tells you what activities are most important to measure to achieve the results you're seeking. And if the business or if an activity is falling behind on a certain type of critical metric or critical performance indicator, then that can be automatically identified as a risk, right? For example, some companies think it's very important, cycle times are very important activity, right? It should take you X amount of time to get from point A to point B. And for this type of project, and this is the type of project that we have, and based on the input, we're not going to make it, this program's at risk, right? So yeah, you can monitor activity, but you also have to build data and based on history, right? And some of it could be, you know, just general knowledge of individuals that you actually put in some actual dates. Hey, this should take 3 months. This should take 2 to 3 months. And if the forecast says it's going to take 6 months, you know you're not going to meet your financial performance unless you make some adjustments, right? Or then if you do, if you know you're not going to make it, can we find offsets? So again, that's driving behavior, but it's also driving behavior through the activity of execution. So that's how we look at it. That's what we're designing. That's based on our experience. That seems to work well in terms of execution. Did that capture what you were asking?
Yes, yeah, and 90% of the groups were engineers, so they were very specific on performance. And to make this sound really old-fashioned, they were involved in building the Hubble Space Telescope.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So now that's a long time ago.
You know, just remember they were in the block and tackle mode, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And they didn't have this kind of automation capability and the power of computing.
Not at all. It was old DOS.
Yeah, and just think with the types of systems that are available right now, what those I say old minds, like I'm included in that group to a degree, yeah. But how it can really accelerate your performance achievement, and also make life a lot easier as you walk through this, because you have more information available to you than you normally would have, right?
And some small companies, they don't have the ability to upgrade their systems. I'm working with a client that has Sage 90, and the accounting department has to drop it down to an Excel sheet, but they could do much better than that. You got 110 employees, you got 3 divisions. You should be doing something else with your cash flow and improving your operations when it comes to accurate costs. So,
that's a good point, because I'm making a pitch for us, but we've become agnostic to some of these inefficient or legacy systems, right? Yeah. So the ideal is that you pull the information into a centralized location, the kind of information, or it could be activity-based information or key performance indicators, but whatever it takes that drives success and that you need to monitor to manage risk, you put that in one place. Right?
Thank you.
And that's key.
Yeah, just what to add to that, what we really emphasize more is what is the information which is relevant to the leadership. So there is a lot of data and analytics happening at the middle manager level and at the project manager level. And that's not our recommend. I mean, that is happening. So we don't want to go and interfere in that area. It's more about what is not happening, where are the gaps, and that is majority of the gaps are happening or the misses are happening because the leadership is not getting the information on time and accuracy, and that is again more which customized towards the impact to the final goal, which is the margin, right? So if there are programs which are falling behind, what is the impact? Is it impact they need to recover, or they need to offset, or this is falling behind, but they're still okay to reprioritize the resources or decisions to something else? That level of basically the visual as well as financial information is missing. So the cycle time as well as resources are all being managed, but the leadership is not being given the information which helps them to be comfortable in their P&L, be comfortable that they will hit their goals. So they start to basically hedge, and sometimes even run into surprises even after hedging. And what we are looking at is you don't need to hedge in this environment of inflation and price pressures. You need to execute better, and you need to have a very robust risk management, which really helps you to stay on top and actually be proactive in areas where you start to see risk.
So I think this statement kind of captures that, right? Well, the thing we just talked about, that businesses need detailed functionality, including dashboards, predictive analytics, and robust visualization for all the reasons Ajay just stated, right? Yeah. And it works through the leadership team and also the execution teams, right? Everyone needs to have the, information that comes from a common place, but it needs to be in a format that makes sense for them, a robust visualized format. That's linked to, we'll say, the ABC of what that organization requires, right? And that's what we're talking about, support their decision making at the end of the day, right? The solution path. So what I like to do in terms of wrapping up, in terms of like summarizing kind of where what companies can do, and what we found is that best in class companies achieve ongoing at least 5% total shareholder return impact, right? So if companies want to achieve and sustain margin improvement and to grow return on assets, as you know, what return on assets is, how much money you get for, how much return you get for the money you're spending. You want to maximize that. And that's kind of what margin improvement is all about. But there's really some key areas here. One is that we really want to focus on the human resources dedicated to make it happen. Again, as you start defining what's important, you can start aligning your resources to what's important so they know what's impact they're having on the bottom line. That's really important as you manage that, because one thing from my experience, I've always liked to engage my team in terms of why your job is important. What impact are you going to have on the business, right? So if there's programs and projects that need to be executed, they're really own and buy into this. Having that single source of truth, where you reduce the complexity of data and make sure that it's accessible and error-free, right? I think we were talking about, you take things from a central place, put it on spreadsheets, move it to someone else's way to reconfigure it, and next thing you know, it's not real data, or it's old data, and it's not actionable, right? They need to have, companies need to have ready access to meaningful data, including business intelligence. That's the information that drives the behavior of the leadership team to ask the right kinds of questions and to provide the right kinds of support, and ultimately to make the right decisions about how to deploy the assets of the enterprise, right? And then the next one is you got to have real-time access to the status of the programs, of the portfolio, right? And that, I think Tom asked, well, what do you guys do? Well, we do provide the opportunity to provide customized views based on the key stake, even though it's from the same database. But if you're the CFO, you're looking for certain types of data that drives how you can impact the business most effectively. If you're the CEO, you're kind of looking at maybe some bigger numbers around, a bigger impact of programs. You want to know if they're real, right? If you can rely on that, if you can go out and report to the marketplace what's going on. I know someone I know missed their numbers, and next thing I know, they're out of the business, right? And which is unfortunate. So this can kind of reduce the kind of risk of those kinds of things, right? And of course, if you're a CFO, you typically say, well, I don't believe anything you're telling. You can give me a list of programs, but if they aren't, when I think about predictability, but if history tells me that you typically get 3% year-over-year improvement, and you're telling me you're going to get 10%, well, guess what I'm going to book, right? I'm going to book 3% and maybe 3.5% if it sounds really great. But but what we're saying is we can fix that problem by having more predictable forecasts and driving the behaviors around prescriptive and actionable insights. And then finally, when you can't do this all at once for a large enterprise, but you need to put in place the kind of systems and processes that drive this decision making. Whether you start with developing roadmaps of activity, whether you have gates of criteria, whether you have teams deployed to make things happen. Regardless, you need to make certain that it works. But at the end of the day, if you've got really great, robust processes and systems in place, then it's scalable. So that should be the goal. And I'll conclude with that and open it up for any Q&A that we have around this whole topic.
Do you have any case study examples of, real live margin expansion examples and industries or?
Yeah, we have a couple. Now, what we've done is basically defined the process and automated the process, right? Our case studies are basically based on our history with, I'll say, implementing the process that I'm talking about without necessarily all the technical automation, because that's evolved. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And I'll give you a case example. Like I told you, we started off with this $30 million issue around commodity price increases. And what we did was identified teams of individuals across the globe, because we were broken into, the Americas, Asia Pac, and Europe, right? Or EMEA, and created, a series of processes that were very consistent in terms of the way information was pulled together and financially managed, right? And then we put in weekly tracking of improvement projects that were specifically targeted to not only what we want to do, but how much it was going to be worth and when we were going to see the results. So that was managed on a weekly basis, right? But we had to make certain that the organization talked the same language as we flowed through the process. And so we did that. But ultimately, the end result of all of that, and it really took in account all of everything that I've shown here. But the end result was, we more than offset the $30 million. We actually achieved $100 million over a 2-year period, a less than 2-year period. And it resulted in receiving the chairman's award and those kinds of things as a result of the process we put in place. Now, the problem we ran into is it was not sustainable. And the reason why it wasn't sustainable, you probably can guess, is that leadership in various regions change, and they have other priorities, or have, they're just not, the process just wasn't robust. That's why I get down to wasn't robust enough to drive the results, right? Leadership changes, resource realignment. For example, I led the entire initiative, but I was promoted to a different job, and another person came in and they wanted to change the language and the process and the tools, and the whole thing went to crap. For example, not all of it, but it wasn't sustainable in a way. And so, on an ongoing basis, you really need to have, and that's why I love this whole idea of having automation in place and having visualization tools in place, because it's going to drive a new culture, right? It's going to drive a culture of continuous improvement. But from a case study standpoint, absolutely proven. And I think Ajay can talk about another approach that he took on another job that he was involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. I can. And compared to the one you just, a multinational all across the globe, this one is single location, single just US based business, and followed the same exact process. The automation was accepting that it was not on cloud. Currently, what we are doing is all the automation is on cloud. But instead of that being in place, it was me who was the automation for that business. So what was done was basically follow the same idea of proactive automation, writing these scripts to pull the information from multiple sources to a single database, which is where I was managing all the analytics and dashboards and publishing them regularly to the leadership, having frequent meetings with them to just get the decisions. So that is where this particular case study is more of the person being me, the automating factor. Other than that, everything was exactly as we have been talking in terms of single source of truth, in terms of pulling information automatically, real time, pretty much daily, publishing the reports to the emails of the leaders. So they no need to hold meetings or even wait for everyone to come together. You just publish it to them, and they have the latest. They can ask questions and they can make decisions. You hold meetings when needed, but not wait to for the meeting to pass the information. So, and with the predictable forecast, they were also ahead of the basically curve in terms of getting the information after the fact. So they were, again, with actionable insights, taking decisions which helped them to mitigate when the issues were majority of the times issues ran in terms of resources or in terms of decisions. Sometimes when the leadership doesn't get together, decisions get delayed. All those were taken out of as barriers, which led them to recover from being a negative on their balance sheet to be EBITDA positive in about a year and a half. So that was the ultimate outcome of doing this, following this, consistent approach, as well as getting the folks informed and providing them with the meaningful information. And they ultimately, like Richard was saying, it was a change of culture. Ultimately, there was no noise, there was no debate about this information is old or this information is incorrect or this resources deployed in a better project. All those were taken away because all the latest and all the highest return to the lowest return in level of programs were all visible to everyone. And there was more of what makes sense for the business. Sometimes even a low return program was a higher priority because of customer relationship. But they made the decisions very, actively as well as very methodically, versus the loudest one, wheel gets the grease or what, or just not even having the information to make any decision. Exactly the same thought process, exactly the same systematic approach. Now what we have done is put this in a cloud, just so that you don't need a person, the system is there. So that's the thing. We would definitely want businesses to follow the process. They can do it by themselves. This is as long as they can drive it. This is definitely the process returns a lot higher than any traditional processes which have been deployed. Like we've done it too. We have done the inflation management, commodity management of 2% year over year by supplier negotiations, by offshoring, by labor reduction, by price increases. But all of us know that is not sustainable. In my experience, it's about 2 years before those things, literally walk back. When you let people go, 2 years later, they all are walking back, excepting not the same people. So you let people go and you lose knowledge and you lose a lot of morale. And about 2 years, you're getting the headcount back because they were needed. So those are the issues we have all lived through. But what's the option? It's not about we don't know all these issues. It's what's the option, and that's what we continue to talk and promote, and that's what our goal is, to provide a better approach, which is a lot more robust, sustainable, and with a higher return.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Do we have any other questions from any of our attendees? I mean, I could probably get into some really questions in the weeds. Let's see, do we have a new one? No, we don't have a new one. There are no questions in the chats. Any final words? We thank you very much, guys. I know it's I know if I was running a company, there's so many moving parts right now that are moving that maybe didn't move before. Because I was gonna ask you about if you were in a global business, I guess the strength of the dollar is at least helping a little bit on the inflation side. Is that something is that a data point that you guys could put into an automated system that would, I guess, trigger potentially a renegotiation of imported commodities or parts?
Yeah, we've had, we've done some work with some clients that really base their business on global commodity pricing. And so what they did, rather than looking at components and products that they actually sell, they looked at the commodities that went into the product, because that's where the major expenses were. So that's how they decided to kind of manage their costs. But when you do that, you also know there's implications of where you get, in the supply chain, where your commodities come from.
Right.
Those factors
It can cut both ways.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can develop hedging strategies and everything else associated with your commodities, right? And usage, and also impacting your pricing strategy and all the other stuff. So yeah, you can put in some factors that raise some early indicators. For example, if you linked into, say, external sources of commodity trends, right, and tie that into, okay, we've got copper and all these programs when I use X pounds or X million pounds of copper, and we see the trend on copper prices going up. Well, that's going to impact your programs and your costs, and everything else, right? So that red flag can come up, and also you can do some sensitivity if need be to see what implications it has on your expectations of performance. So yeah, the answer is yeah, you can do that, and we could do that if that's all part of the discovery phase when you start working with the company.
Right.
What's the data landscape look like?
Interest rates would be the same factor.
Yeah, depends on the business.
Yeah. So Tom, like Richard saying, we can do it. And the beauty of our system now is, since we are on cloud, there is a lot of public data, like Forex, you're talking about commodities. So what we are doing is we are just accessing all these databases, public databases, and running the analytics on forecasting. And we have some commodity models already going where we have a good correlation on predicting commodity price and recommending to the business what's the right time to buy versus level loading, right? Most of the times business want to level load because of working capital issues. They can still want to do that. If they don't have a working capital, they cannot afford to go buy high in January, where it's the best pricing for that particular commodity. But at least we are giving them a insight or a forecast of what is the expectation on the pricing and what would be the return if they were to buy at the recommended time. And we have very high confidence in that, 95% confidence in actually being able to forecast the commodity prices, excepting the period of COVID, which was just unusual volatility, and we have to ignore that period. But we have basically taken 5 years of commodity prices and run our models, created actually our own models, where we have now started to predict what would be a good would be a price in 2022, and actually coming to very close to what its actual is when we are forecasting. So to your question, yes, in such areas, whether it's foreign exchange, commodities, or any, some folks, not that we are in that business, but weather forecasting, nothing which is all public data, we have access to that. And it can be very quickly put together as a model for the businesses.
I was talking to a business person over the weekend, and are you seeing manufacturers especially maybe moving a little bit away from just in time because of the supply chain issues and start maybe keeping more inventory on hand?
Well, let's put it this way. I was working with a company that became victim of not having enough inventory in hand. So they actually absolutely are changing their strategy on
This was Caterpillar.
Yeah, well, they would be one. That's a good example of a diversified industrial company, right?
Yeah.
That's subject to a lot of commodity price fluctuations, and also with a lot of input from from foreign sources, And so so I'm certain that companies are doing that. They're trying to figure out the best way to do that, but obviously working capital considerations and
Right.
all that, but in the typical metrics, but you got to think a little different, unfortunately, to kind of tide you through, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, you run the business impact on having more inventory or just in time, but not having anything to sell if you have a just in time issue, right? So if you have a good analytics, a good understanding of overall impact of working capital and interest, and still the revenue is there, and you can ultimately hit your P&L, versus I will not have much working capital, but that will ultimately hurt in the sales and sometimes even market share.
Right.
And that's the risk. I don't think most of the businesses are wanting to go there. They'd rather absorb that some other way. And that's what brings us back to margin expansion and how do you offset such decisions?
Right. Yeah.
If I'm going to have to do this working capital and I have to, there is again, interest and cost of capital, it has to be offset. And that's where you pull these initiatives together and then start to see the big picture and the full picture, versus everyone's looking in their own world, silo version.
Yeah. So you guys are basically hopefully building processes and systems that answer the question, what if this happens?
Yes.
If this happens, what's the impact on the business, and can we afford to pivot, or what's the best decision for the business,
right,
to maintain the margins?
Yes.
Exactly right.
So that's the version we are working on is to develop the sensitivity analytics.
Yep.
So before, you don't just want to monitor and execute well, but at the same time, the sensitivity analytics has to be in place for the businesses to make the decisions.
Mhm.